Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Jon Reid toko ingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tāwara o Te Wai. I'm Jon Reid from Water New Zealand. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important topics in the New Zealand water industry, implementation of local water done well. We're joined, I think, actually for the first time, Gillian Blythe, our own Chief Executive of Water New Zealand, first time on the podcast, I think, with Hannah and myself. So welcome to you. And also, to Dave Chambers, Chief Executive of Watercare. So welcome to you both.
Kia ora.
Of course, I'm joined as usual by my co-host Hannah Edmund. Now, just before we start, a little health warning. This podcast is being recorded in mid-June. So what's commonly known as Bill 2 has been prepared in draft with provisions that enable Auckland Council to implement its preferred model for water services delivery. But submissions are still being made and the bill is expected to be enacted during the third quarter of this year. So it's still a fluid situation and it may change, but we're going to have an interesting conversation anyway. So to start that off, I think, Hannah, if you've got a first question for Dave and Gillian.
Okay, thanks, Jon. And lovely to see you both listen to you both on the podcast, Dave and Gillian. So the first question, because this is all such a hot topic at the moment, and we've seen it in the news that Watercare is looking at becoming this new CCO and I guess Watercare Model 2, as people have been talking about it. Dave, how do you think that Watercare is going to evolve through this process?
Well, thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Jon, for having me on the podcast today. And, as you said, there's this bit of a rider about Bill 2, unfortunately. So leaving that aside, what's been really clear to me since I've been CEO since February of last year is that whilst there is doubt around maybe entities and, the Bill 2 reference is very relevant, what isn't unclear at all for Watercare is what we have to deliver to Aucklanders. So fresh water, drinking water 24/7 and awesome sewage services, and of course keeping our people safe all the time is critically important to us. So by the time your people are listening to this podcast, Watercare, with that in mind, could or should have started on one of the biggest reorganisations of our business since it was formed in 2010. So we're going to start that week commencing the 17th of June. And it's about being more efficient, better joined up as a business, less friction, less silos, less hierarchy, but with that purpose firmly in mind about delivering services to Aucklanders 24/7. So we're going to evolve a lot.
Yeah, that is quite a lot, and as an internal structure, but also, I guess, with the vision in mind of ensuring that you maintain and improve on the services that are being delivered outside.
Yes, completely. And, we've got lots of data and metrics as water companies should have. We know we do a good job. We aspire to do a great job and an outstanding job.
And that, I guess, leads me to another question, which is quite interesting and a hot topic at the moment around the governance that needs to be in place and what that looks like for Watercare 2.0 compared to the Watercare that we've known and loved for the last 14 years.
Yeah, so I should say Watercare 2.0 is a phrase I've coined. So it came from me and was really about signalling to our organisation that it wasn't, as reform from 2023 stopped and was repealed, that it wasn't business as usual. We're looking to be better than we were previously and not just going, okay, that stopped, now we just carry on. That isn't the case. And as I've said, we clearly know we need to be better. I would expect in the bill, it's out there in draft, that Auckland Council will still appoint the Watercare board and chair. They're still responsible for employing the CEO. So those governance arrangements in that regard won't change. Certainly the role of a Crown Monitor might affect how they discharge their duties, and that really won't be clear until Bill 2 is fully through the process and so forth. But and I should say there's been uncertainty in New Zealand about balance sheet separation. Well, Watercare, as far as I've known since I joined the board 2019, Watercare's always had a separate balance sheet. and yet we weren't able to leverage that balance sheet. And so it's always been for Watercare about sustainable long-term funding for sustainable long-term infrastructure. And really that's what the financial independence is aimed at from our perspective. And then the governance needs to, of course, oversee that. If our debt profile goes up, well, then, then the board will actually have to oversee that, certainly in a much stronger financial sense.
And that board is overseeing the entity of Watercare.
Yes.
They have those ties into the Auckland Council, but they've got that focus on Watercare as an organisation itself.
Yes, completely. So Watercare is a company under the Companies Act, and the directors and the chair will need to discharge their duties in line with the Companies Act, with the Watercare Act, with our long-term letter of expectation that gives our SOI and potentially Crown Monitor's expectations as well. And last but not least, in fact, it should be the first thing, is Aucklanders' expectations about our role in providing, as I said, potable water and sewage services 24/7 to 1.7 million people is and a fast-growing city. People listening in the water industry will relate. I think Auckland's got another 60,000 people here since last year. So, we need to, it's quite a big task to continue to make sure those services are provided and in the right place where development's going to occur. A real big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that leads then to the separation with Auckland Council. So it's a different organisation. It's got a different structure. It's got the ownership with Auckland Council. So Auckland Council have still got electing the board members and have still got that kind of say in that space. But in terms of its financing and its funding and its running, it is, I guess, to repeat already, it's a very separate entity, isn't it?
It is, Hannah, and the simplest way, and it's not simple, but probably the simplest way, is that at the moment, Watercare, we don't borrow money for our debt in our own name. Auckland Council do that. So in the future, we'll be borrowing money in our own name ourselves, and our own insurance, which at the moment we're in with group shared services around insurance. So a couple of big step changes, and given the level of debt that's publicly disclosed at circa 4 billion, that will have to replace those facilities from council. And of course, our plan over the next 10 years is to grow that, because we're using too much of Aucklanders' cash today to pay for future infrastructure. So we want to grow that as well. And it will be it will be a pretty large corporate debt raising exercise.
Thanks, Dave. And so Gillian, sort of hearing about that and the development and the journey that Watercare's on, how do you think other councils are likely to be able to pick that up and model it, or what influence will that have on the wider New Zealand water industry?
I think there's several differences that Watercare has got. One, obviously, is that they were set up in 2010. They've been going for 14 years. And so, they've got history in terms of delivering, and they've got history in terms of they've got, they've had separate accounts. They've got a balance sheet. They've got all of that sort of pieces in place. I guess one of the other things I would also point to is that, in my mind, a really important part is that they've got meters, and so they have a relationship with customers where they charge for the volume of water that you consume. So if I look around the rest of the country and I look at the challenge that we're going to see for councils to come together, one of the things they've got to do, let's just assume we've got Council A and B, and they've decided together that they can work together, and that they are going to be financially sustainable as an entity. They've got to develop a set of accounts. Now, most parties, when you go out to the market and say, please lend me some money, you would typically say, where's your history? Now, Watercare's got 14 years of history. Dave wants to, innovate and to improve, but he's got history on his side. Now, for that new entity, they're going to have to convince the lenders, which may be the local government funding agency, or it may be other third parties, that they are an appropriate credit risk. They've also, and I think this is something that, Watercare is going to have to think about as well, is that lenders tend to like to see a stable regulatory environment. And so one of the pieces that is ahead of us, and I think it's a really important piece that's ahead of us, is the development of economic regulation. And so, you know, if I look at electricity, or I look at gas, or I look at airports or telecommunications, you've got the Commerce Commission acting as the economic regulator under Part 4 of the Commerce Act. Now, I'm sure if you spoke to those sectors in aggregate, they would say there's some things they'd like to tweak, but I would say that it is a relatively stable regulatory regime, and the lenders understand it, the insurance industry understands it, and that's an important part. And as I understand it, the decision back in, and this, whether it was 2010, I probably wasn't involved in, well, I wasn't involved in water in 2010, is that there was a decision made for postage stamp pricing. You know, there was a single unit rate that was going to be charged to all Aucklanders. And I think that's a question that is going to need to be faced by councils that are thinking about coming together. Are they comfortable with agreeing that there is one rate across the region of which they are in, particularly when at the moment there will be some councils who think that others have invested more or less than was perhaps optimal.
Just going a little back to that financing question, Dave, talked about needing to borrow more, how that's ring fenced. So what does that lead to in terms of sort of opportunities really for Watercare and your customers, sort of for that growth and levels of service?
Yeah, that's a really deep question, John, and just endorsing what Gillian said about postage stamp pricing for Auckland. You know, what was the old Rodney Borough? I'm not sure if it was Rodney. I don't think it was Rodney City. It was 12 years, so they got a significant decrease in price, and it took 12 years of price rises to get back to what Rodney customers had been paying 12 years before. So, you know, larger doesn't necessarily mean more efficient, but it definitely should, and should definitely lead to better prices for people. So the financing, what it really leads to, what I can point to is what we had consulted on in the LTP as a price, which was 25.8% for our capital program, and then 14% in F26 and another 14% in F27 price rise for Aucklanders. And then through the financial independence announcement that the Prime Minister, the Minister and the Mayor jointly made at our CI project, meant that we could reduce that down to 7.2% each year for the next 3. Now, we know that that's still, you know, the Aucklanders, lots of Aucklanders, everyone actually, every dollar counts. And, you know, that's still a reasonable increase. It's about $8 a month, but every dollar matters for people. So the big opportunity it does is spread out paying for this long-term infrastructure over a much longer period of time. And it isn't simple, but it almost is. You know, to use the example, if you're building a deck at home, you can either defer building it if you don't have the money. You can borrow all of the money to fund it and pay it off over time as you earn. You can use cash that you might have in the bank, or you can get at no interest from family and friends or something, or a combination of all of those. Well, at the moment in Auckland, we're using too much cash to pay for 50, 100-year assets. You know, we'd ideally be paying these assets off over 25 to 30 years. Now, you could argue that's still too short, but we're really more sitting at the between 15 and 18 years. So, you know, our price has to be higher to get more cash in the bank, as opposed to Aucklanders who aren't here yet paying and contributing for infrastructure that they'll enjoy into the future. So that really gives us the opportunity. Leverage our balance sheet as any good entity would. But then there's a balance. You don't want to be paying too much interest, but at the moment we're a bit under debt funded and too much cash from Aucklanders. Would give us the choice, of course. Could we do more projects, or what happens with price? But at least this sets the organisation up. We know through, unfortunately, things like the Parnell sinkhole and other with climate change, that we've got historical assets in Auckland that, you know, will need to be renewed in the next 30, 40 years, not least. Where's the next source of water? for Aucklanders, that if there are 2.5 million, 3 million people in Auckland, well, where's the water coming from and where does the sewage go to? And those will be extremely substantial investments.
I think that leads me nicely into the next question that I'd like to ask, but around what has worked well?
Definitely what's worked well is the example I gave about some lower prices with the postage stamp pricing, and is definitely a lower price. I did see last year, working off memory, a figure of something like $100 million, equivalent to lower prices for Aucklanders because of the larger entity than councils doing it themselves. You know, and some of the other things, it's a bit unknown. And the benefits that all of that has brought to Auckland from a scale of infrastructure. We still need to be more efficient. We're out there publicly saying we want 4% efficiencies every year for the next 10. That's what we're on track for. This is actually year 3, so we're not starting now. From 1 July this year, it's year 4. So far, we've pulled out circa 30 million of our operating costs as we've focused on how do we be more efficient. I think the challenge for councils, if I maybe anticipate that, is for others, is building on Gillian's point. How do they unpick what they've got, particularly from a revenue stream where you don't have user pays like meters, and actually guarantee that. And then, of course, a Watercare 2.0, we're still going to be 2 waters. So we have clarity on that. We're not going to be stormwater. We're not going to be doing overland flow paths or urban streams or any of that sort of thing. So, you know, I think for other councils, it'll mean, do they want 2 waters? Do they want 3? What'll work most efficiently for them and for their group of councils? And so, you know, one size doesn't fit all, but one set of engineering standards would be nice for New Zealand. I think that'd be terrific. I don't know why we need to have so many different. And even in Watercare, I was out first thing this morning at our maintenance service delivery team and did a presentation with them. And when I look at their spare parts, going, I don't know why Watercare has so many different sizes of pipes either, because the amount of different spare parts we have to have, and when something happens that we don't have. So if New Zealand all could look together at how do we procure as an industry, not anti-competitively, but how do we procure for the benefit of New Zealanders together, and one set of engineering standards and one way of doing these things it should be so much more efficient for New Zealanders. Why do we want to do that? We want lower prices, or we want to mitigate inflation and price rise. That's exactly what we need to be doing, because we don't have a profit motive. We have a public good motive.
Gillian, I guess from a national perspective as well, and thinking about some of the smaller councils who, obviously, if you sit in one of the smaller councils, I can imagine looking at Watercare and saying, you're a great big entity that has all of these years of experience. But what do you think this kind of means for them and the bits that they can start to pick up on?
I think one of the pieces is to understand how within that larger entity there still is able to have local voice in the conversation. So the people in Rodney, I'm sure when they were being brought together with the rest of the super city and that we created Watercare 1.0, they were worried about whether they were going to lose voice. And so part of that is like, how can we understand those lessons and what is it that Dave and the team do to make sure that happens? Now, some of that might be, and I can imagine, I mean, you know, if you go to the most northern district that Watercare serves to the most southern district, you know, I assume that the depot that's serving the south is not based in the north. And so some of it might be that you have to think about those logical pieces of what do you need to do. You know, if we are, you know, one of the options that's been considered is a group of 10 in the Wellington wider region. I would anticipate that if I was in the Wairarapa, I would want some certainty that if the Rimataka incline was shut, I was still going to be able to get a crew. I've always looked at the electricity sector and gone, you know, you often had distribution businesses who wanted to develop an outage app. Now, over time, many of them have developed those outages apps. And I would anticipate, without knowing, that some of them are white labels of the other. And so one of the pieces we might need to think about is what can we do that Watercare's already got that we can pick that up, and instead of having it in Watercare colours, we can colour it in, I'm wearing pink, colour it in pink if that's what's required for that particular area, so that we can leverage those strengths.
Well, and I can confirm for you, Gillian, you're dead right. The people are served in Wellsford, which is our most northern area. The people there are based from Rosedale and actually locally, because there are people that just go straight from home and go to jobs straight from home and finish their day and then go back home. And geographically, it's exactly what we try and do. And Pukekohe, driving the length of Auckland would be pretty stupid. So we try to avoid all of those things wherever possible. And it can lead to efficiencies. And I remember John Lamont last year telling the story between, and even if there's not a formal arrangement, can there be some informal? So telling the story between Kaipara and Whangarei, where the service person would live in the outer edge of Whangarei and only, say, a couple of kilometres from the Kaipara district, same service provider, but because they're contracted into Whangarei, they can't go 5 k's the other way down the road and provide the service in Kaipara, bill Kaipara, have that independent, have that wall between it, but actually they can't just go and do the job even if they're available. So, I think there can be there's a whole range of opportunities perhaps that it might present for some of those types of things, where there is with these national standards, and that would definitely make it easier. And but where it's the same contract provider to different councils, how can they work across, but the billing be obviously bespoke into the right area for people.
So Gillian, what do you think are the next steps that we need to take this forward more widely across New Zealand?
Well, I think first and foremost, we've actually got to pass the legislation. So submissions, in terms of the week that we're recording this, submissions are due on Thursday. I'm anticipating that, as you mentioned at the beginning, that the enactment of the bill will be probably early August. I think we've got a report back on the 18th of July. And so things are moving ahead. And I think once you actually get that piece of legislation confirmed, it's had the royal assent, that then councils will realise that, they've got a timeline. They've got 12 months to provide to the Secretary of the Department of Internal Affairs water service delivery plans that are going to demonstrate the model, the governance model that's going to be there in place, and how they are going to ensure that they are financially sustainable, investment adequate, and there's appropriate affordability lens that's been applied. And I think what we're doing now is working through that process of what does it mean to be financially sustainable? What does it mean to be investment adequate? In my mind, got to comply with the Te Mata Arawai drinking water rules and arrangements, the full set. You've got to comply with your resource consents. The regional councils have got resource consents arrangements with whether it's drinking water, wastewater, or stormwater. You've got to make sure you're thinking about that, as well as then a future economic regulatory regime. And so I think we need to come together as groups of councils to see whether we can find a way of being able to reach an aggregated model in parts of the country. And that's going to be the first step, I think, post the legislation being passed, of can we agree to work together and produce an outcome that will ensure that New Zealanders across the country have healthy water, have safe water, and that we have improved environmental outcomes, whether we're talking wastewater or stormwater, and that it's a price that you and I are all comfortable and recognise is sensible value for money, and ultimately is something that the investment that's required is going to be there for the people who come after us.
Dave, any last comments?
For me, it's we're going to build Watercare 2.0, a financially independent Watercare 2.0, and we're well on the way for our plan for that. And then for New Zealand Inc., just build on everything that Gillian said without detracting from it whatsoever, is, we have to have less black flags on the beaches of Auckland. We have to have improved rivers, so our children, ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, the people that come after us, have much better outcomes in the environment than what we're able to give them today through the water industry. And that's not us alone, of course. There are many industries that affect that, but but certainly where sewage, etc., comes into play, that we need to have better environmental outcomes and be delivering that as well.
Thank you both, Gillian and Dave, for joining Hannah and myself today. It was great to talk to you both about the changes we expect to see to water services delivery in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I think we should come back and discuss this subject a bit more once that bill gets royal assent. Thank you to you for listening to this latest episode. We're back next month with our next podcast.